context. And that means understanding where you're going to implement this structure. So we thought we'll start from the overall picture, the governance, the regulation. How do we create so much new work for you, and how do you make that be part of innovation? So we have with us today the best panel in the world to talk about that. You know me, so I don't need to introduce again myself. Why don't we start with introductions? Suzanne, why don't you introduce yourself and then pass the microphone?
Yeah, happy to. Really excited to be here today. So Susanne Brink, I'm from Lloyds Banking Group, and I'm the head of responsible AI. I've been in the responsible AI space for sort of moving on 6 years now. I started by working with an organization that was making products in recruitment that were AI enabled, which is of course very high risk. And then I worked as a head of data ethics and responsible AI for a consultancy that was working across sectors. So financial services, but also loads with the public sector. And since 4 months with Lloyds Banking Group.
Excellent. What about Laura? Yes, sure.
Hi, so I'm Laura Bishop. I work for the British Standards Institution as their AI and cybersecurity sector lead. I'm also currently on a 2-day-a-week out of 5, seconded to the UK government as their socio-technical aspects of AI fellow. So I am by trade a psychologist with a PhD specifically in human interaction with technology.
We won't answer any questions.
Hey everyone, I'm Rock Lambros. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I have a AI and cybersecurity consulting company called Rock Cyber, and a core member of the ASI team. You know, my big head is blocking everybody's view up here, and happy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ali?
Hey, I'm Ali Shepherd, so I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor and CISO at the FCA. Hopefully everyone knows what a CISO is, but just quickly, the CSA role is an external-facing role looking at security and technology trends and how they might impact the UK economy and therefore financial services and regulation.
Thank you. So let's start with a little bit framing the conversation about when we talk about regulation and when we talk about governance frameworks out there. What is out there in the UK, Europe, and how does it compare globally and sectorally? Who wants to start with? What's the landscape, if you like, of regulation governance? And we'll start with the regulator. Yes,
I am, but it might not be where you expected me to start.
That's okay.
So I think the first point I wanted to make is that this more than ever is driven by geopolitical trends at the moment. So at a macro level, we've got US-China competition, and that is looking at technology supremacy, economic supremacy. Beneath that, we've then got a pattern of fragmentation. So we've got an EU bloc, we've got emerging powers like India. And amongst all that, we have the UK, which is, you know, we have historic relationships, but those are in slight turmoil at the moment, I would argue. So it is treading a path where growth is a huge focus for our government, and therefore a huge focus for regulators, and that's a change for us as well. So all of this is driving a slightly different pattern, and standards become a key part of that. So I think the UK is actually in a pretty good place at the moment. It hasn't jumped in with legislation, and I look at this at 2 levels. So I've sort of talked about the macro environment, but within that, I think there's another 2 levels. So we've got the model developer, and that's where the sort of safety aspects come in and legislation. And the UK didn't jump in with legislation, but it did jump in with engagement. So it is engaging with hyperscalers and model developers on a voluntary basis to talk about those safety aspects. And those are really high level. So chemical, biological, nuclear, misuse, misalignment level, and then at a regulatory level, and sorry, I've done quite a long sort of pass over.
That's okay, you can carry on, we like that.
So at a kind of deployer level, it is then a regulatory sectoral approach, and I think that's also appropriate. And then for us as financial services, as the FCA, that is a principles-focused, outcomes-based approach, which works really well in this space. We might come back to that. But yeah, so I think UK in a good space, but it is in this context of we shouldn't shy away from the fact that a lot of the standards in this space internationally are being driven by geopolitical trends.
Thank you. And let's go to Laura a little bit before we go to the US. I was going to say.
I was just going to zoom out a little bit. So I try and stay on top of the AI strategies for the top 10 AI countries. And in all of their strategies, there's sort of the same four things that they look at: infrastructure, data, skills, and risk. But it's kind of like the overall nation's ethos that I guess always tells the truth about what they're trying to achieve. So the US, as an example, is win the race, or another one they use is build, baby, build. China's is more thinking they're in it for the long haul, but with some quite focused missions along the way. And the UK, their main ethos is AI adoption, particularly within the civil service, but a lot of their reports signal to stay grounded, be mindful. And I think that's really important because I work for BSI, and we were the first national standards body in the world. We wrote the first standards on with the tram tracks many years ago. We're kind of known for being forward thinking, but staying grounded. So I think within this space, it's definitely important to be mindful as we make these decisions going forward.
Fantastic. And Suzanne, I'm leaving you at the end.
Yeah, and I think that the lens I can bring to this is having worked across sectors, right? So currently being with in financial services, I agree a lot of the regulations actually pretty well defined. There's been translation into the AI space. Some of that's also still being worked out with things like sandboxes, which we're participating in, which I think is a useful mechanism. But then having worked in other areas such as recruitment and public sector, there's guidance that's been evolving, but there's less clear regulation that's very sectorial in a lot of cases, more cross-sectorial, right? So
Exactly.
EHRC, ICO is still very much applicable. But it does require a bit more of a sort of translation step sometimes. And so then if you compare it, and that's, I guess, we'll head over to the US after this, having worked for a company that was US headquartered in recruitment, the standards there are actually really clear. And I think that's not quite as clear in the UK. So you do see a distinction between sectors and how much clarity you actually get on the ground as a practitioner. But yeah, everything else I sort of echo what's been said.
Rob?
So in the US, yes, we are in build, baby, build mode with this current administration, right? And but the challenge is that just like we haven't learned from our fragmented cybersecurity regulatory landscape or our fragmented privacy regulatory landscape, we are also going to end up with a very fragmented AI regulatory landscape where each individual state is working on its own AI law or set of AI laws, right? So we will have 50 plus regulations that we're going to have to worry about. I live in Colorado. We passed the first in nation state level AI policy. In my opinion, it was more important to be first than right. And you're seeing that now, given that it's been delayed, the implementation has been delayed twice, right? And, you know, those are some of the challenges that we're facing. So while there was a movement in Congress with the last infrastructure bill, spending bill, to put a prohibition on state level AI policy for the next decade or so, we have this little thing called the US Constitution, which gives the states actually a lot of rights to govern. And long story short, it was pulled out. That didn't pass. So there's a friction and a rub between build, baby, build, and what the states want to do at the state level. And the states are trying to govern specific risks. Like the Colorado bill is effectively an anti-discriminatory bill and a consumer protection law. Whereas Colorado also has a consumer protection law, right? So there's going to be some confusion there. California, the big bill that just passed in California is more around like bias mitigation in the frontier models, right? That type of stuff. So TBD on where the US landscape is honestly going to land and where it will land before the end of this administration and versus who and which party, frankly, comes in for the next administration.
So it sounds like a multi-agent system, evolving, fragmented, and my goodness, where we're going to start. So I'll start, how do we move from that uncertainty the geopolitical fracturing is not going to go away, but at the same time, we have a room of people that some of you said actually you're developing multi-agency. I don't believe you, but if you have that level of complexity, how do we make sure that we enable developers with clear guidance? And I'll start with my view. So the UK government, I completely agree with you, Ali, on the approach that we have taken. They released the Code of Practice for AI cybersecurity. I'm very biased because I wrote the implementation guide, but in there is very clear mapping to standards. And I think we need to carry on mapping what's happening at the high level, but we need to find practical guidelines, practical standards that help everyone in the room. That's my view, my very long-winded view. Who wants to start?
I'm happy to get this on the first go. So I think it is complex, right? It absolutely is. I like to believe that the function that I represent in the group, which is the responsible AI function, can play quite a meaningful role in that space. So it's bringing together, it's connecting a lot of functions, right? So we work super closely together with security, with what we call CTO or architecture group and other functions, but also legals and our compliance groups. But then we take that sort of overarching view of saying, okay, is this ethical? Is this as safe as we can get it and want it to be? And it kind of boils back down to that a lot of the time. And then we do the sense check with all the other functions back in, right? Like every, from a consumer duty perspective, et cetera. We thought about everything. Can we make it auditable and put it back? But by taking that helicopter view of kind of going back to wanting to make systems that are efficient and are effective, but also are sensible, and you design them with the responsibility from the very beginning, you kind of simplify the measure back a little bit. But then, of course, it's going to help as we get more and more examples of good practice that will allow us to go faster and kind of sense check ourselves. But it's back to the basic principle.
Start from what is good, rather than worry about the regulation as what I'm hearing from you.
Well, we're still worried about it, right? But it's almost, if you take that helicopter view, it helps you get far along the way, and then you do need to, of course, do the sense check. But it stops you from, I think, just being at the box ticking activity through all the complexity that does exist still in space.
Thank you. And you mentioned AI sandbox. I absolutely agree with that kind of approach, and it's going to be highly dynamic and constantly evolving, right? So, to your question, John, you talked about sort of compliance and standards, but I think you start with risk, and we also have a responsible AI body. That responsible AI body needs some sort of framework. So we, at the highest level, NIST AI risk management framework, which aligns very closely with the government principles. And then you have to apply it to your use case and understand your organizational risk tolerance. And I think if you start from that and then map over to compliance, that's a much better start point. Manage it within your organizational risk appetite, and then understand how you map it through to compliance is a much better approach. And then last thing I'll say is just to say it will evolve and adapt really quickly. And the FCA as a regulator is currently doing something called AI live testing. So that is working with financial institutions, and this was announced this week. So Lloyds Bank is one of them. I think I've seen others in the room where we're saying bring your use case, and that has to be a use case that is ready for deployment. And then we'll see how you're doing it. And please, Suzanne, jump in as well, because you're on the other side of this. We'll see how you're kind of proposing to run your use case and what we think the appropriate controls and mitigation should be, and whether that meets, because effectively what we're trying to do is, I think someone used the word translate, what is reasonable or fair or prudent in a world where you have a black box of a system at the middle and it doesn't have the same controls and monitoring that you normally apply.
And you mentioned a very key thing being your organization's risk appetite. So this is audience participation time. How many of you understand your organization's risk appetite? How many of your organizations, and raise your hand if you're willing, how many of your organizations have actually articulated your risk appetite, particularly around AI, and how that aligns to your organization's risk appetite? Yeah, there's like single digit hands in the room for those of you on the live stream. Okay. I'm sorry? Yeah, trying to get them to formulate a risk appetite. So, because we're seeing, we're talking about in the Americas stance right now with build, baby, build. We are absolutely seeing that within organizations, right? Call it agile or whatever the case may be. Fail fast, fail often. but without the consideration of the potential downstream effects, which is why I think the work, and sorry, I'm gonna self-promote OWASP, that OWASP is doing, to kind of provide that guidance for organizations is hugely important.
Yep.
I guess I'll just add to that, that there always seems to be this argument, like this seesaw between you have to choose innovation or you have to choose a focus on risk, not kind of understanding the process of AI is an invention at the end of the day, and for it to become an innovation, it has to be adopted by people. And we have started to see some AI tools like the Humane Pen who didn't consider human adoption at all. So when it came to be used, it was too heavy for a cotton shirt. It couldn't be looked at in conferences when that was because it was too light, I think, the text. So that didn't fit with the target audience. I think there's been a lot of just kind of throw things out without thinking how it's actually going to work for the person. And with all the psychological theories out there, when it comes to people and groups of people, adoption is all around cost versus benefits. And everybody knows kind of the benefits that AI can bring at the moment. I think many organizations and people are experiencing them. But it only takes one big risk for that person or one big incident and something to happen when that tool will be just completely dropped. So I actually think innovation starts with risk, considering risk.
And so what I'm hearing from all of you is, yes, of course, there are guidelines. Yes, of course, there are standards, but they're helping us to understand what our response to risk is. But first, we need to understand that risk, whether it's security, whether it's across the responsible AI. And do we think that that kind of balancing act between innovation and governance and compliance is happening, or who do we think is winning at the moment? Are we bombarded with different standards? Are we have standards fatigue, or do you think people? And Susanna, I know you said you're already kind of taking that path that says let's be kind of agile here, let's be lean.
Yeah, no, I'm reflecting on your question. I don't experience attention. Maybe I'm lucky, but I think to your earlier point, right, with good standards and sensible regulation, you actually can help innovation flourish. Because when people don't feel that like they're sure they're doing the right thing, or they might be harming someone unintentionally, and it can actually make them really uncomfortable with the innovation. Or they'll hit a roadblock later down the line, to your point, right? It doesn't get adopted well, or there's some other sort of negative impact, which means the whole thing doesn't get the innovation value you're after. So you can have poor regulation and legislation, don't get me wrong, right? Which does create roadmaps, and also the operationalization matters. But when you take a proportionate approach, and then I think standards.
But we're not at that point where we have those pressures. People are able to find their way through this.
I mean, I think what is potentially a sort of growth curve, right, is that we're still, certainly with agentic, very much still learning how, what good practice looks like, how it all works. That makes us go slower from the sort of governance responsible AI perspective, but you're learning that alongside the application, and therefore I think what I'm seeing, I'm hoping the project teams would agree with me. We're trying to do that together so it doesn't become too much of a frustrating piece. But yeah, you're not able to give a streamlined governance cycle just yet with the latest technology, right? So you do probably delay things in that regard. Yeah. And then it all depends, I think, on relationships and sort of positioning. But that becomes a frustration point. I hope it isn't, but you may need to ask the project teams as well.
Okay, so I will add that that's something the UK government are doing really good. So they fund a program that BSI is part of called Bridge AI, because they noticed that for SMEs who Bridge is targeted at, they're okay on the innovation part. They're really agile entrepreneurs, really forward thinking, but they struggle more with the incorporation of standards and risks and cost outlay and time on that front. So there's programs out there that at the moment that are helping SMEs right the way up to big tech. Because we do find that with our standards committees, standards are written by sometimes up to 180 experts from government, technology organizations, interdisciplinary. So I'm on the AI one and I'm a psychologist. But we do have a lack of SMEs because they don't have the cost to be involved. So the UK government is still funding ways in which SMEs feed into standards, but also that standards how could be adopted to improve the adoption of AI within SMEs. I hope I've explained that right, full circle.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little about what I'm seeing at the enterprise level, since we're just talking about SMEs. Some more challenges in the States with regards to cost, resources, their pressure, speed to market, that type of thing, right? But at the enterprise level, what I'm seeing from an innovation perspective is the business will always win, right? So as a recovering CISO, the business will always win. So when we don't provide some guardrails within the organization to say, here's your playground, please use this, go do it safely here, they will find other ways, right? We've all heard the term shadow AI. I can't believe we've gone like 3 hours so far, almost 2 hours so far, and haven't brought it up. But that's where you're seeing it. And so I think guardrails are important. I think the industry is also important, at least in the States, right? Like financial services have had model risk regulations, particularly around machine learning, for about 15 years. But you know, the startup ecosystem in the States, it's like speed to market, venture capital pressure.
As you'd expect.
As you would expect.
Thank you. And yeah, I completely agree on that. So I think security and risk as enabling. So actually, my function, the CISO function of the FCA, the vision is enabling secure and resilient regulation. So that's the first bit. We need to enable the function that our organization fulfills. And we did that by quickly getting out principles, then a policy, and then a responsible AI framework, and then said, right, accelerate. If you're running a POC, very low risk, you don't need very much input at all. If you're putting a decision-making process into production, then definitely come and talk to us very early. That was one part. There's something else you said as well I was going to come back on, but it's gone completely out of my head, so I'll stop talking.
So what I'm hearing in a very, kind of simplified, my simple mind is that understand your organization, your sector, understand your risk, use the stuff that we give you today to understand better the agentic risks. And with that, oh, sorry, Ali.
And that sparked the memory. So it's just to say,
I have this effect.
Thank you very much.
It's triggered a memory.
They're not always pleasant memories, but you spark memories. So it is learning the mistakes from cloud, and some of that was understanding the technology, but some of it's scaling, right? So, and I think this is where we're about to go, but to your point, in the enterprise, you can build quite a safe system that does a single use case, but it might not scale. And there's two bits that, lessons, I think Chatham House here, two lessons from our...
We are live streaming it, so it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to...
So Chatham House to everyone online as well.
Well, I'll create another pleasant memory.
Okay, it's pretty generic. So in some of the testing we did, it's the actual testing itself. So we designed a system, we did some human manual-led testing. So is this accurate? Is it complete? But then we worked out that wouldn't scale, and that we hadn't designed a system that could have automated testing. We had to go and rebuild it to run the automated testing, which scaled us from tens to thousands of tests. So that point on scaling. And the second one is gateway. And so zero trust, to my mind, is an attempt to put a virtual perimeter, although I know that phrase is not the right one, but a virtual perimeter around a sort of sprawl that we had when we just had uncontrolled cloud expansion. We need to avoid it in AI. And quite early on, my view is we need an AI gateway. And I think some of the talks up front were coming to this. There's an environment. You will not be able to scale monitoring and detection of agentic systems, which are hugely complex. They're going to generate, if you think just say LLM plus RAG, that's difficult enough. You need to multiply that by 10 or 50 or 100 when you build an agentic system and understand what that looks like from all the stuff coming out of that. So having an AI gateway that kind of routes everything through a single place makes that manageable. So yeah, sorry, very long.
No, that was a great point there, and I'll ask you later on about the pleasant memories. But for now, I think what I'm hearing is if you just go and say, computer says no, shadow AI will thrive, so don't do that at home. Understand your risk, understand what you're trying to do, and use a material for threat modeling. And we started talking about agentic AI, and you started very nicely talking about how this exponentially increases. What are your views, Suzanne, about how agentic AI is affecting innovation, governance, and all that?
Yeah, it is more complex. It also does revisit some of the risks we've already been managing around language models. What I think is really interesting, what I find in practice is a much closer collaboration. We've always been close to security, as you know, John, so that matters the same or more. But also I find it's more of an engineering conversation now. So architecture becomes more in the mix of the conversation than I've seen in the past from this seat, if you will. I think that's a positive thing. It's just a difference. And I think if I kind of boil back, you could say all sorts about agentic and the ways in which it is different and cascading risks and different components versus endpoints, etc. But I think in the end, the human oversight. I'm a psychologist too, I didn't say. Human oversight component is going to become a really interesting conversation topic because the observability, telemetry, so important. But then where do you put the human? In what way? To still say there's a degree of meaningful oversight here, right? It absolutely needs automation, all right? That I think it's already been concluded. But you still want a degree of sort of meaningful understanding what your system does, at which points do you put that in, how often, what's good enough. And for the longest time, sort of human in the loop was kind of our default where we didn't know anymore, we just say that, right? I go just put a human in the loop. That doesn't fly in the same way. So I think that becomes a really interesting piece, which maybe even something that standards might start to have an opinion on its own right? I don't know if you will.
Yeah, so already, standards like Bush 2001, the AI management system standard, they are socio-technical. So they consider people, processes, technology, and so on. I just wanted to bring one thing up, just leading off what you said there, is human in the loop is an interesting term because people think once they put a human in the loop, that's fine. But there's something called the dark side of autonomy, and that's understanding how the human brain works. And humans don't like accountability. They don't like to make moral judgments. Particularly, we saw this in a lot of autonomous vehicle research where they didn't want to be handed back control at any point. It's like that trolley problem. Do you carry on going forward and kill 5 people, or have you got the guts to change direction and just kill 1, but you've still got that on you? All those sort of moral questions. We don't want to take those on. So what you notice is we'll hand sort of decisions over, but then we just back away when an agent tries to hand it back to us. We're not interested right until the last minute. So that's why it's really important to understand how the human works in AI literacy to the humans so that the full process flows well.
I think it's great that you say that because one of the key points that we brought into this top 10, and it was hugely controversial, is over the trust, exploiting the trust on the agent, because exactly of those sociological factors. So it will be interesting to work with you on diving in outside this panel. But for now, Rob, what's your thoughts on agentic and governance and human in the loop?
Well, I mean, I think we've established that doesn't scale, right? And then you're talking about like probabilistic determinations around like what threshold do I trigger the human review, right? And that can change based on the agent's current context. So you can't just say if it's score of 8, whatever, something simplistic like that, right? And so there's a lot of research to be done there. There's a lot of research being done around the decentralized government of agentic systems, right? And having some sort of like orchestrator or Janus agent that's the monitor of the monitor, and having humans focus on the governance agent. I'm sorry, Janus was the Roman deity, two-faced deity, right? So that's where that name comes from. And we have a lot of work to do there with regards to actually implementing. There's a lot of great research out there, but the implementation and operationalization of it.
Yeah, it's a word to say that. I will struggle.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
And I think sometimes, before I go, Charlie, I think sometimes, we talk about human in the loop, but for instance, there are industries where AI outperforms humans. We never talk about agent in the loop. So I think sometimes we really need to understand the threshold, and that's why the telemetry and understanding what good is important.
I truly believe that we will need AI to govern AI. I mean, as security professionals, I've been in the industry almost 30 years, 25 years, and we have always, frankly, bitched that, if we didn't have users, it'd be secure. Sorry.
You're in the UK.
So if it were only for the users, right? The users are a problem. Humans are the weakest link, right? And now we're counting on humans to save us from these very complex AI problems. And the reality is there's got to be a balance, right? It's not a one versus the other. Human in the loop isn't the solution, an agent in the loop isn't the solution, right? How do we marry the two?
Exactly. And understanding it, when we talk about human in the loop and explainability, decentralizing governance doesn't mean we,
Right.
sign a blank check. Ali?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we have utter consensus. I could rant, and I think this room could all agree one thing: we should get rid of the phrase "human in the loop." So, right, if people currently just mutter it like that's the answer. If you've got a human in the loop, like, hey, yeah, that's okay, then, and that's really dangerous. But also, sometimes it's not appropriate. Sometimes it doesn't scale. So there's all these thoughts, and that was the default answer. But back to your point, I think accountability remains, right? So what we have is a business use case owner. So every use case at the FCA has an executive director saying, yeah, I put my hand up. It is appropriate that we run this use case with a model. You don't have a system owner, that's the technology implementation. Is it meeting what we promised it will meet to the CD? And then a operational business owner, the day-to-day sort of delegate. And that triumvirate, with all the support that comes behind it, is absolutely critical. Because you can have an agent in the loop, you can have no human in the loop, you can have a human in part of it. I accept we're going to get rid of the phrase, and I've just used it 3 times. But the point is, the accountability is with a person, no matter how complex and sophisticated and good your AI system is, it's a person that owns it and owns the outcome, and that is critically important. So accountability, not human in the loop.
So we start with accountability, we marry it with risk, and then we work backwards to understand what AI does and how humans work, which I think is actually the most neglected part of all this. I'm glad you brought it up, Laura. So we have agentic, and we're getting towards the end of the panel, but agentic AI just demonstrates, like generative AI, how much technology accelerates change. How do we, and then, you have all these people say, oh, kind of comply with the standard. How do we catch up with that change? How do we bring governance and managing AI risks with this constant change?
So standards, at BSI, we've gone some way towards that. So the standards process, because it takes a lot of consensus, standards have to go out for public comment. It takes about 3 years. Now, obviously, that's not going to work when it comes to, AI and the situation we're in. So we brought in 2 different types of standards, one called Flex and one called PAS, where you can, within 18 months to 2 years, get a standard out. But with the Flex one, you can get an initial standard, perhaps just talking about the terminology. Within 3 months, it goes back out, it's trialed, it comes back in. So some things have happened to try and make standards fit. That being said, I'm on the Tech UK's Emerging Technology Leadership Committee, where we talk about convergent technologies. And I do think that's what we're working on at the moment with BSI when it comes to standards, is about to get a lot scarier, because we've got liaisons that go between artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. But when you add in robotics and immersive technology, and suddenly you've got 5 or 6 experts that all need to kind of have a conversation, that's where we need to kind of rethink how we're going to make standards, policy, and so on more smart.
I think go back to the operationalization standpoint, right? Because innovation is not going to wait for standards. In the US anyways, most of the laws that we have on the books right now, there's some safe harbor provisions. If you align organizationally your frameworks to something well recognized, like the NIST AI RMF or ISO 42001, and you can demonstrate that you do so, right? So there's got to be the documentation behind it, not just like, hey, yeah, we aligned. Hi, look. Which we'll see a lot of.
Tick box.
Yeah, tick box. And so, but what I think that does, if there's a benefit to that, is it allows you as an organization to set up your internal frameworks to allow for that adaptability, to be able to, be quick to market or quick to production if it's an internal use case or whatever the case may be.
Excellent.
Just really quickly, and I think Suzanne touched on this earlier, it's where the upfront architecture becomes really important, because we talk about flexibility and modularity about tech systems all the time. Critically important here. So, we've been looking at the fact that if you upgrade the model, it might actually negate all of your prompts, even an upgrade within the same model family. So you have to have this built in. And this, I think that the time frames now are 3 months for model upgrades. So if we're looking at that kind of cycle, flexibility, modularity, the ability to test at scale, and then that's the last one, is the scale. And you won't scale if you've got 50 use cases with 50 separate sets of monitoring. There's got to be some way of centralizing it and reviewing it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is just from a practical perspective, I find myself back at conferences a little bit to kind of just sense check what we're doing as well, because it is changing in front of your eyes. So the classic read up, right? But also just talking to other organizations has been quite valuable. And then you do start seeing some themes that everyone's exploring slightly different ways, but then that gives a degree of comfort. So that's part of what I'm doing from my seat. As well as obviously we talked about the sandbox, but it's that sense check that I think is we're back in that phase. It feels like we were just there, and then we started to kind of feel a little bit of comfort around. Okay, so this is sort of how we do Gen AI, and then now we're back there talking to each other and learning from each other.
And maybe that's the new normal. Maybe technology will, or not maybe it will. And I think what I'm hearing from you is threats will change, sometimes exponentially, as long as we have the approach in place. And I really liked what you said about architecture, not as in a kind of some bureaucratic exercise, but a deep understanding of what you do across the organization, value the risks, understanding the human factor, and of course the debate amongst all of us, the community, so that we all align is the best way to respond to that. And we have time just for one question. Who wants to volunteer? Because we're overrunning. Anyone? I will go for the lady there, actually. Sorry. I'll give you the next panel. I'll bring you the microphone.
Thank you so much. First of all, great panel. I had a question about the kind of human AI teaming point. So I think you guys made some really good points around human in the loop not being enough, because there's fatigue due to the speed and opacity of agentic systems, and then AI as a judge not being enough. Obviously, it's probabilistic in nature. I guess my question is, what would a good human AI team look like? Like you mentioned AI literacy, what are the other kind of key components that you'd recommend?
Excellent question. Thank you. How much are you?
Yes, I think I'll give my thoughts on it. I'm sure you're itching to jump in as well. So I think it isn't the same answer for every use case, right? We already established that. But it is exactly as you position it. I think it's not only the human doesn't scale. It's not only automation. It's not fully reliable. It's a mix, and where do you put the threshold depends on the risk levels, depends on the kind of signals you need to look at more closely. I think also looking at the space that you're not getting signals from occasionally, just to sense check your approach. But I think part of it is kind of back to old around AI and agentic AI systems in a wider sense are social technical systems. You want to look at the overarching impact of what you're doing, not just at the system. And that's where you look at the outcomes you're getting when you put the human and AI together. And that's the bit that needs to reach a certain threshold of good. And that won't be exactly the same thing in every case, but it's looking at that overarching outcome of what you're achieving that needs to be up to a certain standard. With the right mix of human oversight and AI. And that's a bit of a generic answer, but it will depend.
Very good answer too. Thank you.
Okay. So to bring it back to AI literacy, there's a couple of things within there that we really need. We're working towards the AI literacy standard at the moment. And the reason why that's required is because humans need to become better at understanding, first of all, whether they're working with AI, how to work with it appropriately, and then how to contest it if they see something that may be harmful or the decision isn't quite how it should be. We're still learning from a psychological perspective how humans are interacting with chatbots. As an example, we were talking earlier about chatbot addiction is a thing, the upset when a chatbot is discontinued, so the abuse of chatbots. So we're learning a lot about the human AI relationship that perhaps we hadn't quite realized before. So I think from a teaming point of view, there's a lot to learn, but we have to start from the point of AI literacy. And that's right across the board. So the UK government has put funding forward for university students, secondary school students. I mean, China have been giving 4-year-olds education on AI for years. We really do need to kind of move forward with this. board members, there's funding, but there's still some young people that are using AI every day, and are apprentices, so they'll never have the education they need, and that's our kind of future workforce. So I do think AI literacy is like at the root of good AI human teaming. Yeah.
I think as we are putting regulations or standards or even internal processes into place, we need to consider the impact on that AI is having on the individuals using the AI, right? So for instance, in the Security Operations Center, which is the reason why I have no hair and gray beard. There's about a 75%, 80% turnover rate among security analysts because of alert fatigue and alert burnout. And this was before AI, right? Now, there's also huge use cases and benefits of leveraging AI to reduce that alert fatigue. But then if we then turn around and replace one alert for the alert of, hey, this might be a high-risk action, go review it, we're back in the same boat, right? So, you know, now you're just changing one problem for another, right? So there needs to be some serious consideration in that effect. And I am not a psychologist, so I am not going to pretend to have a solution for that.
Very good answer there.
I mean, I think it's all been covered, to be honest. And the only thing Rick might add is we already have this use case dependence is the key bit, and the risk dependence. We already have technology systems, some of which are fully automated, some of which have to have a human at the end of it. And you make that decision on a case-by-case, use case dependent risk basis.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. I know you have many questions, but we don't have the time. I wanted to say that take our top 10 today and start understanding the risks, as we said, understand your use cases, and we will have more events like this, going back to the conversation where you'll be able to discuss this again. And I'm sure my guests will be delighted to come back and have a similar event again. Until then, a big round of applause from the panel. Thank you.